Ever wanted to get support for your deck but don't want to wait for a main booster release? Fear not, because we have the release of the first ever English extra booster in Cardfight Vanguard history, Cavalry of Black Steel. Much like the previous video, we actually got this set out of order, as this is the third ever extra booster, but it was given to us as the very first one. Originally, I was going to cover this together with the set 6 Breaker of Limits in one big video, but I cut this out for time. The reason I wanted to cover these sets in one video is not just because they were released so closely together, but also because cards from both sets created the most used deck for the first ever Cardfight Vanguard Championships for the English format, Spectral Duke Dragon. Interested in what I'm going on about? Let me give you the deets. On July 7th, 2012, the first ever extra booster in the English format was released, Cavalry of Black Steel. As I mentioned a few moments ago, this was the first extra booster in the English format, but was actually the third one released in Japan. We would eventually get Extra Booster 2 later in 2012, and Extra Booster 1 way later. This set had a total of 47 unique cards, and supported a grand total of 7 clans. Those included Royal Paladin, Oracle Think Tank, Shadow Paladin, Gold Paladin, Kagero, Spike Brothers, and Mega Colony. The change in the English release schedule did result in this set introducing Shadow Paladins to English for the first time. Shadow Paladins was a very popular clan that had a big role in the anime. There was even an entire set featuring Shadow Paladin, but we wouldn't get to see this in the English format until the end of 2012. Shadow Paladin only received a grand total of 2 cards this set, one with no effect, and the other a grade 3 with Limit Break, which could only use its skill if you retire 2 other Shadow Paladins for the cost. This meant you would need 2 copies of the one other Shadow Paladin that existed in the English format, or all of them. This was the main gimmick of Shadow Paladins, retiring its own rearguards in order to gain power for effects. Of the remaining 6 clans, Gold Paladin, Mega Colony, and Spike Brothers received the most support. Let's go into Royal Paladin next. They received a total of 5 cards. One of these cards was actually in the first ever tournament promo pack in Japan. There was also the Twin Shine Swordsman Maharas, which was an extra grade 3 rearguard that gained some power, but the most notable of these 5 was the White Dragon Knight Pen Dragon. This was the first ever Limit Break unit for Royal Paladin and had the effect that it could ride another grade 3 from the top 5 of your deck at the beginning of your main phase. This initially didn't see any competitive play when it came out. Most Royal Paladin players were still using the Soul Saver Dragon with Barkle as the starting vanguard. As mentioned in a previous video, Royal Paladin was going to receive a restriction that barred it from using Barkle as the first vanguard. This restriction was announced 3 days after this English extra booster was released and wouldn't go into effect until a little less than a month later. Royal Paladin gets hit pretty hard from this restriction, as in the English format they did not have their support from sets 3, 4, or 5. 5 being the one that made this deck one of the big 3 that we keep talking about. Granted, it became one of those big 3 with a deck that did not need Soul Saver Dragon, but we wouldn't get that set 5 until 2013. There will be a Royal Paladin list that manages to top in the Championship Series, but we'll discuss it in more detail in a future video as it uses a lot of cards from set 3, the very next main booster releasing in English. For now, you can just have a quick peek at this list. It was of course focusing around the Soul Saver Dragon. Ended up playing 1 copy of the Knight of Determination Lamarok from this set, but only at 1 copy, along with another 1 copy of a Knight of Silence Gallatin from set 1, mainly just using these as 10k vanillas. Oracle Think Tank received a total of 4 cards, but they all had minor effects. Omnimuji gained power if you had more cards in your hand than your opponent, a similar effect to Battle Sister Mocha from set 1. Blue Scaled Deer could Soul Blast 2 and draw 1 card if its attack hit. The same effect as made in a Libra from set 1, but with 1000 less attack and a different cost. Petal Fairy and Omniscience Madonna could both draw 1 card after discarding 1 card. These were okay cards, but didn't really add much value to the clan. Similar to Royal Paladin, OTT was missing its key support from those sets that were skipped, support that would elevate it into one of the big 3 as well. I know, I keep teasing these guys to you, but we do get to talk about the first of these big 3 in the next video, with Goddess of the Full Moon Tsukiyomi, who took a good amount of the top spots in the 2012 Championship Series. None of the 4 cards here will be widely used, aside from this one list that used 1 copy of Omnimusia of the Moonlit Night as essentially a 5th Battle Sister Mocha. Moving on next to Kagero, they received a total of 5 cards, which included their very first Limit Break unit, Dragonic Lawbreaker. Lawbreaker had a very interesting skill where, on Limit Break, you could counterblast 1 in your main phase to bind all of your opponent's rearguards. Then, at the beginning of the end of that turn, you force your opponent to choose 4 of those rearguards and place them back on the field. Any remaining rearguards are put into your drop zone. This effect would at most result in the opponent losing 1 rearguard if they had 5, the max number of rearguards they could have on field at this time. However, this also meant you removed all of your opponent's intercepts for the battle phase of this turn. Your opponent would be forced to guard using only cards from their hand. Lawbreaker had a second effect that allowed it to gain power if your opponent had a small amount of units on field, which its Limit Break guaranteed. Kagero players did manage to make use of this card and some of the Narukami cards from set 6 to enhance their builds. Here's a list from the 2012 Championship Qualifier in France, from the runner-up William Astol. This list includes 2 cards that we'll be going over in the next video. As for the rest of the list, you can see a lot of the usual suspects. Dragonic Overlord, Gatling Claw Dragon, Conroe, Bar, Ermo, and Berserk Dragon. You can also see here that PGs are being run at 4 copies. Even though Kagero always had access to Conroe to search out a PG from the deck, this format required everyone to up their PG count in order to actually be able to guard efficiently. You also see the Hex Cannon Dragon from set 6, as well as the new Vanilla Grade 2 with 10k from this extra booster. The general game plan is to filter through your deck with Ermo and Dragon Monk Gojo, see your offensive and defensive pieces, while using your skills to control the battlefield. Or essentially the same game plan from the Goku Overlord deck we went over in the very first history video. Next we have Gold Paladin, arguably the biggest winner in this set since its support created a competitive build that had a massive turnout in the first ever 2012 Cardfight Vanguard qualifiers and was also used by the winner of the Championship Series. Gold received a total of 9 cards from this set, but the main cards were the infamous Spectral Duke Dragon and its Ride Chain cards. Spectral Duke Dragon was a card that borrowed from Shadow Paladin, with its Limit Break allowing it to retire 3 Gold Paladin rearguards and counterblasting 2 in order to restand at the end of the battle that it attacked. It would lose the Twin Drive ability, but could keep all of the power and criticals it acquired from the previous battle and do 1 more drive check this battle. Even though it loses the Twin Drive ability, any unit on the Vanguard circle can perform 1 drive check when it attacks, unless stated by another card or effect. Spectral Duke had a leg up on the only other unit that can restand on the Vanguard circle at this time, Dragonic Overlord, in that his first attack did not need to hit for the restand to trigger. Overlord's restand only worked if its attack hit, but also Spectral Duke was not once per turn. So if you had another 2 counterblasts and 3 other rearguards to retire, you could actually restand again. Here's a list from the French qualifier from Annie van den Oelent's Championship list. For the most part, this was the standard base for Spectral Duke Dragon, aside from these extra draw triggers here, which were actually from set 7. But we can go ahead and replace those with a playset of draws from set 6 and it'll have the same effect. The key cards of course being the Spectral Duke Dragon and its Ride Chain. The Grade 0 has the same effect as the Erdeel Grade 0 we talked about in the previous video, allowing you to add the Grade 2 or Grade 3 of the Ride Chain from the top 7 if you rode the Grade 1 of the Ride Chain over it. The Grade 1, when ridden by the Grade 2, allows you to retire 1 Gold Paladin to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and call 2 Gold Paladins from among them. The Grade 2 had the same skill when you rode Spectral Duke Dragon over it. This call allowed the deck to be very aggressive from the get-go, since you could potentially get 2 rearguard attacks to pressure your opponent almost every single turn. This allowed you to close out the game with your Spectral Duke Dragon when you rode into it and its multiple drive checks in a turn. We can also see here the triple rare from set 6 in Vivian, who could also pull a card from the top of the deck for Counterblast 1 when her attack hit. All of these effects had the wording up to, which means you had the option to call or look at less than the maximum amount, or even call none. The cards you did not call would be put on the bottom of your deck in any order. You could use this to perhaps not call out your triggers, but players of this time typically called their triggers out anyways, as an extra unit or 5k attacker / booster in the case of a trigger was way better than just not having it at all. Triggers could only give 5k power when they are checked, and units that aren't triggers only had 5k shield, so adding a 5k booster to the board greatly increases how many cards your opponent will need to use to guard for that turn. The Spectral Duke Ride Chain was one of the main strengths of the deck. By giving up 1 rearguard, you can replace the rearguard and get another rearguard while not losing any cards from your hand. In addition, the next turn you'll be able to do the same thing again, slowly swarming the field while still not playing as many cards from your hand. This exchange would always result in a +1, or in other words, you would always gain 1 more card than the cost you paid to pay it. This allowed Spectral Duke Dragon players to guard with ease, while not losing out on any offensive output at the same time. You could also count the top 2 cards of your deck as an extension of your hand, meaning if you didn't have the right units in your hand, you could still get it from the top 2 when you rode. To be honest here, I might be upselling the Ride Chain, as you still needed to actually hit this chain, which wasn't always guaranteed. If you played 4 copies of the Grade 1 Voltimore in your deck, the odds of you actually getting it in your starting hand before Mulligan is only roughly 31%. The Spectral Duke Dragon would also be an 11k base Vanguard, thanks to the effect of the Ride Chain. If you had the Grade 2 of the Ride Chain in your soul, Spectral Duke would gain an additional 1k power. We've mentioned this before, but before 11k Vanguards became the standard, it was very useful during these early times in stopping attacks if your opponent didn't have a booster or their own 11k base Vanguard. This is true for the Ride Chain as well, as the Grade 1 and Grade 2 had a similar effect, allowing them to be 1k higher than most units, which required a booster or attacker in order for your opponent to attack into them. If the Ride Chain was missed, players could always just ride the 10k and 8k units that were used in the Ezel Ride Skip chain to continue having these high attack Vanguards. During this time, outside of stand triggers, not many decks could do more than 3 attacks in a turn. If a Spectral Duke Dragon player attacked with their Vanguard and checked a single trigger in that first attack with a booster, they could go up to a total of 23k power in that turn. An opponent with a 10k base Vanguard would need to spend a minimum of 2 triggers with 10k shield or 3 cards with 5k shield to fully guard this attack. After the restand, the typical attack pattern meant that you would retire your rearguards in an L shape. 2 rearguards in a column that already attacked this turn, and the booster behind the Vanguard. This allowed you to put triggers on another unit if the Vanguard attack was not guarded. Anyways, if the following Vanguard attack swung without a booster but had some trigger power, it would be 16k. Since there was still 1 drive left, it could reach a total of 21k. This meant that, yet again, your opponent would have to use 2 triggers with 10k shield or 3 units with 5k shield to guard this attack. That's a total of 4 to 6 cards for only 2 of these 4 attacks. Overall, Spectral Duke Dragon was very successful during this period due to how easily it could superior call from the deck, have 2 Vanguard attacks in a single battle phase, and the format not having the big 3 that was dominating in Japan. The altered product line favored Gold Paladin and Spectral Duke Dragon early on greatly, as they not only had less decks to compete with, but they also didn't have the caliber of decks that Japan had. In addition, due to the near worldwide release of Set 6 and this extra booster, there was no months of information and deck lists from Japan for English players to study beforehand. Even if you could take a look at what Japan was playing, it sometimes wouldn't be as useful, as they had 3 main boosters, 2 more extra boosters, and 2 trial decks in their card pool than English did. These factors, the deck strength and popularity, led it to dominate the World Championship Series. We'll talk a bit more about this in more detail when we cover the Championship Series. Next up we have Spike Brothers, which was the second of the big winners from this mini set, receiving a total of 12 cards. This wave of support gave the clan many key cards, which was great, but they won't be receiving support for a long time, similar to Grand Blue. Spike Brothers received their first limit break unit here, and the main vanguard for the clan, Demonic Lord Dudley Emperor. Dudley Emperor was a perfect card for Spike Brothers because on limit break, when you declared an attack with him, you could counterblast 2 and put 2 Spike Brothers from your hand into soul to call 2 other Spike Brothers from your deck. These cards had to be called on open rearguard circles, but this was no issue for Spike Brothers, thanks to their initial wave from set 1 that cleared themselves from the field after attacking. These grade 2 and grade 3 now had a grade 1 counterpart in the Reckless Express from this set, who shared the same effect as Soul Blast 1 when at attack to gain 5k attack and then put itself at the bottom of the deck at the end of battle. These cards in combination with Dudley Emperor allowed Spike Brothers to score 5 attacks in a single turn. In this set, we also had more Dudley cards, such as the Grade 1 Dudley Daisy and Grade 2 Dudley Douglas, who could each counterblast 1 to gain 5k power if they were placed during the battle phase. There's also another Grade 3 Dudley that functions similar to the Gantelot from Royal Paladin, but could return itself from hand into deck to add any Grade 2 or less Spike Brothers card with Dudley in its name from deck to hand. This really helped Spike Brothers gain some ride consistency. Here's a list from the 2012 Championship qualifiers in Hong Kong from the champion of that event, Muk Hee-chun. This list contains all the cards we talked about just now, and the game plan was to go into Emperor, have your combo pieces in Reckless, Bari, and or Juggernaut to clear your circles mid-battle, and then gain 2 additional attacks after that with Emperor's Limit Break. You can even call the same cards you just put back into your deck that battle phase, and use their effect to Soul Blast and gain power yet again due to the cost of Dudley Emperor putting 2 cards from your hand into Soul. Spike Brothers were a very strong deck after this extra booster, as they were one of the few clans who actually got more than 3 attacks in a turn. These attacks were also pretty sizable, thanks to this trio being able to gain an additional 5k power from their skills. On top of all of this, Dudley Emperor's Limit Break was Counterblast too, so you could do this twice in a game if you save the CV, or use the critical trigger Silence Joker to unflip a card from your damage zone. Unlike all the unflippers we talked about in previous videos, Joker could be used in your main phase, and did not require an attack to hit. It only required you to have the card, call it out, and pay the cost of putting it into Soul to unflip. Naturally, this would also give you more Soul for your units to use. Spike Brothers would see some success in the Limit Break era due to their explosive nature, but will eventually fall behind due to the lack of support. The final winner from this set was Mega Colony? Mega Colony is another clan that will not get heavily supported for a long time. They'll get another big wave soon, but it'll be slim pickings after that. Mega Colony focused on stopping your opponent's rearguards from standing, paralyzing them in place. They received a total of 10 cards this set, which was actually 1 more than Gold Paladin did. There was the Limit Break unit, Martial Arts Mutant Master Beetle, who could counterblast 3 when his Limit Break was active, and it attacked a Vanguard to force 2 of your opponent's rearguards to not be able to stand during the stand phase of the next turn, or paralyze as players colloquially call it. To accompany this, there was a duel of Toxic Trooper and Toxic Stander, who were grade 2 and grade 1s that would not allow the opponent to intercept against their attacks. They also received cards with generic effects that every clan eventually got. A special intercept, a card that allowed you to draw if an attack hit while having a full board of units, a card that allowed you to soul charge when placed, a grade 3 that gained 2k power when it attacked, and a grade 1 that allowed you to discard a card to draw 1. Werent Colony didn't see any tops during the Championship Series, so there were just no lists for me to show from there. I did manage to find a list from the time that's an upgraded version of the Noah Grappler Mega Colony list we discussed before. This list uses cards like Red Lightning and Mr. Invincible to refund the cost of Mega Colony's high CP cost, much like we discussed before. However, you'll see that Master Beetle is nowhere to be found here. Instead, this list actually uses Master Freude, who we talked about in a previous video, and it actually allowed you to Soul Blast 3 to draw 1 card. You then had cards like the grade 0 here to guard, and the Machining Mosquito, as well as Red Lightning in order to fill up your soul for this cost. Before we end off this video, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a very important part of Vanguard history that often doesn't get enough of a spotlight. I'm talking about Cardfight Capital, which I suspect did way more for Vanguard's success during this time than many give it credit for. Not to be confused with the card shop in the anime with the same name, Cardfight Capital was a digital card fight simulator that was in service from March 2011 until January 2013, when it was officially shut down. This wasn't the only simulator around at this time, but it grew to be the most popular. This simulator was mainly used by the English-speaking community and played a huge role in expanding and exposing Vanguard. As part of my research for these videos, I always ask players if they use Cardfight Capital, or CFC for short, but many say they did not. I wasn't playing Vanguard around this time, so I reached out to renowned TCG historian Toya from the YouTube channel Lost Worlds to learn more about Cardfight Capital. If you don't know about him and you're interested in videos on history of Japanese TCGs similar to these, please go check out his channel. His content was the biggest inspiration for me creating these types of videos, so a huge shout out to Toya for sharing this with me. Starting off with CFC's early days, Toya shared the following.
The program was originally published in March 2011, shortly after the first booster set and trial deck launched in Japan. It was created by Devourer of Souls, who previously created Duel Monsters Expert. The program was one of many hosted on Beyond, a website and service for easily setting up online games.
Small side note, but for those who don't know, Duel Monsters Experts is a game in Beyond to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Digitally. I actually think I played it in some point in my life. Anyway, Toya went on to say,
It started out very small and grew into the most played game on Beyond for a while. Over 2,000 players, more than 100 concurrent users on the main server at any time. After the shutdown, it became much harder to bring anyone into Vanguard because of the low urban density outside of Japan. During the CFC era, you could teach the game online and those players will go out and start their locals.
Toya shared many screenshots of the game with us and gave us a rundown of the interface.
This is what the main area and the chat box look like. The sword icon means the players engaged in a fight. The blue square means they're in deck editor, and an eyeball means they're spectating someone else's fight. Here's one of the fights in progress.
He also described a memory he had with CFC.
The game started out with just Card Capital as a room which was periodically updated with more polished tile sets, but CFC quickly got overcrowded, so the developers created a second lobby based on Card Shop Handsome. Everyone started in Capital by default and manually jumped over to Handsome in a navigator menu whenever Capital got crowded. He also described a memory he had with CFC. There was one update late into the game's life where they added Card Shop Psi. Except every time you tried to go to it, you would get lost and wind up at the beach. It was really an exciting time, but I think it only lasted 2 months before the official shutdown came in. I remember testing a lot of BTO 9, Infinite Phantom Legion, Celestial Valkyries, and creeping Dark Goat Shadow Paladin decks around this period.
Like many do today, heck, much like I do today streaming on this very channel, players would start playtesting cards the second they were revealed. Toya went on to add why CFC was not really used in Japan and was mainly used anywhere else.
There was no real Japanese usage of CFC for a couple of reasons. Home computer ownership in Japan was actually very low at the time and didn't pick up until 2018. Beyond is 90s software, not designed for phone usage, so you had to at least have a laptop to play. Another reason was the greater proliferation of hobby shops and stronger urban density. Vanguard was a much bigger game in Japan, partially because the country is physically smaller. Canvassing the entire Yamanote line in Vanguard ads is easier and more impactful than buying a billboard space along the Interstate 90.
Overall, CFC fixed a huge problem that physical TCGs, including Vanguard to this very present day, have: accessibility. If you live in the US or other countries outside of Japan, visiting card shops regularly isn't a thing for most people that don't play TCGs. There also isn't one on every corner like you would see a Starbucks or a corner store. For those that have shops near you and can go regularly, stay blessed. But for many people, card shops are rare and possibly really out of the way. Even something like TCG Player, which many of us use today, was still in its early days and didn't even list Cardfight Vanguard from the looks of it. On top of that, TCG Player regularly only ships in the United States, with only certain sellers really shipping to other parts of the world. This was why it was so huge, and I made such a huge emphasis in the previous video about you being able to go to a Walmart to get whatever you needed for your everyday needs, and randomly there would be trial decks for Vanguard there. But even if you could get your hands on these trial decks, it still didn't mean you can actually play the game, since you still needed someone to play with. CFC removed so many of these barriers, as you only needed access to a computer and an internet connection to play Vanguard, something that was common enough in the US and many other countries outside of Japan by 2011. This accessibility allowed just about anyone to play the game, but also gave an easy way for anyone to introduce others to the game, which helps grow the community. I feel this has a powerful cascading effect that will always be stronger than any type of marketing. Like Toya mentioned, CFC had a large community that really helped a lot of Vanguard players stay in the game. Unfortunately, CFC had to shut down after receiving a cease and desist. This won't be the last time we have similars throughout the history of Vanguard, and there are even some attempts from Bushiroad to create official ones. This will also not be the last time we touch on CFC either. Were you a part of the CFC era? Share your thoughts below so you can share CFC as part of Vanguard's history. This was an amazing time for Vanguard. For the first time ever, it finally felt like the whole world was actually playing Vanguard, much like the scenes that they would depict in their anime series. It's very reminiscent to what it's like right now leading up to the Divines era, where there's a lot of excitement and a lot of new potential players eager to play Cardfight Vanguard. While the game never reached the status of number 1 or 2 or 3, it is definitely thriving at this point in time. We'll continue to see Vanguard's success as we venture forward into its history when we go from set 6 to set 3? Till then, take care of yourselves and each other, play Vanguard, and have yourselves a damn good one.